on where all this came from. I started using Schoology about 5 years ago. I had a colleague kind of mention it to me and say, hey, I found this free learning management system. It looks like the stuff that we had been talking about, because we were both really interested in blended learning. So I just kind of started slowly with Schoology, as I think most teachers do. You dabble a little bit here and there with discussions and assignments, and it started to grow from there. And then the year after I discovered Schoology, I had a really, really rough group of kids, which, any of you that deal with students on a regular basis, classes overall, they kind of come in with a personality, just a group personality. And the group that I had 4 years ago, it was just a personality of apathy. And they had no interest in completing work. They really weren't concerned about failure. Even their parents, when I would make phone calls home and say, hey, little Jimmy hasn't turned in a single assignment this 9 weeks, and they would just kind of say, oh, well. So I had just reached this frustration point where nothing that I was doing was working, and I couldn't get performance out of the kids. Nothing I was doing was engaging them to the point where they would actually complete an assignment. And so I started doing some research. I found some fantastic resources on gamification, a lot of which I link at the end of this presentation. And I figured, why not try it out? My kids were doing terribly, so it's not like I could do any worse. And I just kind of threw caution to the wind, and I fully gamified my course. And we're going to talk about what that means and what that looks like, because I know that that phrase gamification, it's a buzzword. It's kind of scary. A lot of people think it means just playing instead of learning. And so we'll clear up some of that. But just to show you what happened, after I implemented the gamification in my class, I saw dramatic improvement. The figures that I saw initially were about 30% of work was getting completed. Before that, about 30% of my students would actually do what they were supposed to do. And then after I implemented the gamification through Schoology, it went up to 100%. Where I had 100% compliance, 100% engagement, 100% of my students fully invested in what we were doing. Because test scores matter, even though we wish they didn't. My test scores improved in very surprising ways. Those high flyers, they're going to achieve no matter what you do. But the most interesting thing we saw were my lowest quartile students. Kids who had never passed a standardized test in their life were passing my civics exam, my state civics exam. So a kid who scored a level 1 on their reading and math exam, suddenly they're scoring 3s and 4s on my civics exam. And that's when I knew we had hit on something meaningful, because they were blowing a very difficult test out of the water and just really doing well. So just to show you what gamification is, what it means when we say that term. What we're talking about is the application of game design to real world problems, and we see it everywhere. If you have that Starbucks app where you get the little stars, or if you do your Fitbit where you get the badges for however many steps you walk, all of that is gamification. And the business world got on board with this years ago, and they've been kind of growing and embracing it more recently. Education is starting to figure out that this works for our students. And it works for several reasons. These are the principles of gamification. And if you really look, most of these things are things that we keep being told we need to do with our students. The main thing that's required for a game to be good is that it requires mastery. You don't have a game where the objective is, kill 3 out of 10 of the bad guys. No, they want you to kill 10 out of 10, or they want you to find 20 out of 20 of the little magic rings, or whatever it is that you're being asked to do. And that is something we should be doing with our students. I think sometimes we kind of cheat our students when we tell them, oh, you made a 50% on this test. Oh, well, it's over and done with, move on. They didn't master that. And so mastery is one of the core principles of gamification. It's one of the core principles of good education. A good game embraces failure. If you've ever played a game on your phone just while you're wasting time, waiting for a meeting to start or something, you know that if you fail a level, it's not the end of the world. You get to try again and again and again. And so often in the classroom, we don't do that for our students. And so they get this idea that if I fail, that's it. It's over and done with. I don't get a second chance. And so they just give up. Over time, they've failed so much that they don't even try and attempt to pass anything anymore. So with a good game, you embrace that failure as a learning opportunity. Okay, you didn't meet your objective this time. Let's talk about what you can do to actually meet that the next time you try. A good game allows choices, which, in the education world, we call that differentiation. We try and give our students the opportunity to choose the path that best defines who they are as a learner. And games figured that out a long time ago. Games allow choices. They allow you to modify what you look like, what your powers are, so that you can choose your path in a way that best suits you. Sorry, that's our summer school bell. Good games are accessible. And basically what this means is you want your game to be simple enough where there's not going to have to be a lot of tutorial behind it for them to pick it up and get started. That doesn't mean in the classroom, that doesn't mean creating assignments that are so simple that no thought goes into them. What it means is their ability to access those assignments or their ability to understand the instructions. It's all very clear. And we know that. We know one of the first things that we look at when we see a teacher who's struggling with failure in their classroom is we kind of take a look at their tests, we look at their assignments, and we say, are these things being written in such a way that your kids can even understand what you're asking them to do? And that's something that is true of any good game. They look at the instructions, they look at the objectives and say, is this something our players are going to easily understand? A good game defines goals. That's your learning objective. That's when you lay out, these are the standards that you must teach in order to cover this material. These are the objectives a student must meet in order to pass this exam. And that's what a good game does. They will have updates. Here is your mission. Here are the steps you need to take to complete this level. And so that's very easily adapted in the classroom. They recognize progress, which I can't think of a single teacher evaluation in this country that doesn't have some element of praising students for their process, celebrating student success. That's why games are successful. That's why our kids eat them up, because when there's progress made, not necessarily a level even passed, just progress made, you've grown, they are celebrated for that. They receive some kind of recognition, something we should be doing in our classrooms. And then finally, they sustain interest, which is just a fancy way of saying engagement, which is that term we use all the time with classroom instruction. Are you engaging your students? Yes, it's wonderful that they're compliant, but are they actually engaged and invested in what you're trying to do? And so when you have a good game, or when you design your instruction as a good game, that interest will be there, that engagement will be there. And so whenever I started researching all of this, I found that Schoology provided me with the perfect platform to do all of this. Schoology is kind of a blank slate. That's one of the things that I really love about it, is it's not canned curriculum. It doesn't come with all of this stuff that's pre-slated in, where you just kind of have to make yourself fit into the Schoology mode. Schoology is set up so that you take charge of your curriculum, your classroom, and you make it work for you and your students. And so I was able to take all of this and then in turn put it into Schoology and use that to motivate my students to finally start getting something done. I went over the classroom applications, but just very briefly, the main things that you're going to start getting out of your gamified classroom, if you choose to do something like this, are differentiation, mastery, engagement, and collaboration. And this is a huge deal. Differentiation allows your learners of different abilities, of different strengths, to hook in to what you're trying to teach them while feeling like it's kind of on their playing field. Mastery, making sure that these students aren't just breezing through assignments, taking their 50% and moving on. They're really learning it and retaining it. Engagement, that feeling that when the bell rings, they're sad to have to leave your classroom. That is the best thing that I hear. I heard it from my 7th graders. I still hear it. I teach seniors now, and I still hear it when the bell rings and they go, "Oh, I'm not ready to go yet." That's what you want. You don't want kids, you know, packed up before the bell even rings and out your door. And whenever you can successfully do something like gamification that draws them in, you get that genuine engagement. And then collaboration, that's just a natural byproduct of a good game. If you've ever played a good game, if you've ever been invested in video games or even board games and things like that, there's a collaborative nature to it. Even if it's a single person game, you'll reach out to somebody when you hit a hard spot. When you hit a level that you can't pass, you'll reach out to somebody and say, "Hey, did you do this? Help me out." And that's what you want happening in your classroom. Very briefly, just some kind of technical lingo that I'll be using as I show you the Schoology examples, how I set this up in my own classroom. If you're not familiar with these terms, it can sound confusing at first, but I just want you to kind of have a little dictionary of gaming terms. XP is one of the most common things that you'll see in any kind of role-playing game that's popular now through video games. So those games where students or players have quests and missions, objectives that they must complete. XP is a short-term way of saying experience points. So as the player increases their experience, they get XP. In my class, XP is a way of saying, what have you learned? So my students earn experience points when they master a concept. For every assignment that they complete to mastery, for every test that they pass to mastery, they'll receive XP. Things that show this player started out at this bottom level, but now they've progressed up higher and higher, and they're more successful now. And they're capable of kind of attacking greater villains, which in the classroom world would be more difficult topics, more difficult concepts. AP are achievement points, and these are things that players earn whenever it's called an achievement, but it's just a way of saying you've done something special. You haven't just completed an objective, you've kind of gone above and beyond, and you've really done something worthy of note. So my students get AP for things like attendance. If they have perfect attendance for 9 weeks, they get a considerable amount of AP. If they make a perfect 100% on a test, the first time they try it, they get AP. Things like that that are worthy of note. Item shop. Most games will have a place where you can go and buy items that will help you be more successful in the game. I'm going to show you some examples from my item shop. Things that my students can buy using the AP that they've earned for going above and beyond in my classroom. And then a gift shop where I'm able to allow my students to use those same AP that they've earned to send gifts to one another, things that might help their friend become more successful. So that's just kind of your dictionary of terms, so you can kind of follow along as we look at what this looks like in Schoology in practice. The link that I've provided here goes to my Open Civics course in the Public Resources on Schoology. A couple years ago, I put everything that I had done through Civics into the Public Resources because there was considerable interest in what we were doing and how this gamification worked within a classroom. And so finally, instead of trying to answer everybody's questions, I said, well, you know, just have it. Take what you want to take. So you're more than welcome to go to that link and you can dig around. We'll go to that in just a little bit. But if you want to get ahead of us, feel free to go and dig around in there. This is a screenshot of the main page of my Open Civics course. And if you look down here, you'll see the beginnings of the quests. A quest in my classroom is basically a unit. So what I did is I took all of my benchmarks that I had to teach and I broke them down into units, benchmarks that kind of went together based on topic or based on skill. And then I created a unit around them that I turn into a quest, because quest sounds a whole lot more interesting than unit and lessons. So my students would be sent out on a quest where each mission within their quest would be a different benchmark. And they were told, in order to successfully complete this quest and get your XP and your AP, you have got to master these objectives that you come up against. I know it sounds silly that, you're just kind of changing some terminology, but it changes the kids' attitudes when they come to your class. It's something different. It's something refreshing. It's something that they do at home. This is the vocabulary that they operate in if they're gamers. Even if they're not gamers, they respond to this. But those kids who are your hardcore gamers, who are very often your ADHD, sometimes learning disability kids who love that gaming world, but you struggle to get them invested in your classroom, they respond to this so well. And they just kind of light up because they realize this is going to be something that they understand. We talked about the importance of mastery, and like I said, a good game is going to allow you to attempt things over and over again until you master that objective to perfection. There's no halfway. I tell my kids, you can't do something 50%, you can't do something 70%. I'm not even happy with 95%. I want my students reaching 100% mastery. And I tell them that that's important out in the real world for us to continue trying until we get to that 100% point. Schoology, especially through the enterprise version, has this wonderful mastery setup where you can actually set up your gradebook to track mastery. So every assignment that I have in my course is tied to a learning objective. This is from my civics course. I've done the same thing with my high school courses that I teach now. Every assignment, every test question, everything that I do is tied to a standard. And so when my students turn something in and I grade it, I get this quick feedback about where they are. So the people in red, they haven't quite reached mastery yet. Green means they've mastered that particular standard and they're free to move on. Schoology just makes it really, really easy to track those things so that you can get a good feel for where your students are. Embracing failure. One of the things that we struggle with if we're in a paper pencil classroom is giving students multiple opportunities, because multiple opportunities means multiple paper copies of tests, multiple versions of whatever it is that they're working on. Schoology makes that really, really easy. One of the things that I loved about Schoology right from the outset is you have the option with tests, or if you set up a quiz, or even if you set up some kind of interactive worksheet through the assessment portal, you have the option to give kids as many attempts as possible. Some teachers don't like this. They get a little bit worried about cheating or you're giving them multiple opportunities. My answer to that is part of the reason our kids stop trying, like what I said earlier, is they become so used to failing they have no confidence in themselves. And so it's easy to just Christmas tree the test, take my 30, take my 40%, and just give up. If I didn't try, then it doesn't hurt so bad when I fail. When you remove that obstacle, you remove that one and done attitude, and you actually give them the opportunity to try multiple times, or, if you really want to go all the way with this, to put it on that unlimited option and let them try as many times as they need, you see the engagement come back. You see the effort come back because the fear is gone. Now they know it's not the end of the world. If I take this test and I make a 20% the first time, That's not going to go on my grade book. That's not the stamp that goes on my work. Now I know I need to go back and study more, or Miss Box is going to come and she's going to talk to me about this and she's going to help me realize where I need some help. And then I get to try again. It takes a few tries to get them out of that failure mentality. But after a while, through embracing this ability to turn things in multiple times, to try again, to reassess, you see your kids come back to you and you see the real joy for learning come back. Giving them options, that differentiation, allowing them to kind of forge their own path. Schoology allowed me to do that with the student completion option. Anytime you have a folder full of material, you can choose student completion, which will allow you to set a requirement for each assignment. One of the things I love about gamifying my course is it benefits my higher kids, my middle kids, and my lower kids. Your high flyers, they're going to push on with or without you. Those are going to be those kids who can complete 3 quests in like a 4-week period, which is a tremendous amount of work. I don't want to hold those kids back. I don't want this kid over here who's able to move forward to have to sit and wait for me to work with this other kid who maybe struggles and needs a little bit more one-on-one time. So through student completion, I'm able to set the standards, and I can say, once this kid turns in this assignment and makes 100% on it, this next assignment can open up for them and they can push forward. So those high flyers, they're guaranteed only to move forward when they've reached the standard that I've set for them. Meanwhile, my lower students, my strugglers, I'm able to work with them one-on-one. I'm freed up to give them the attention that they need and to adjust things for them as needed, while still holding them to the same standards. Learning targets, those objectives where your students clearly understand what's expected of them. There are several different ways you can do that within Schoology, but my 2 favorite ways are, first of all, rubrics, which you see an example here. Through any assignment, you can create a unique rubric. You can have standard rubrics that you use on maybe recurring assignments, but students can see this rubric is always posted at the bottom of the assignment that it's given to. So when my students are reading the instructions for that assignment, they also have that rubric right in front of them, and they know, if I'm going to get my 100%, these are the things that I have to do. The other way that Schoology allows me to really nail my learning targets and be sure of what I'm asking my students to do is whenever you look within Schoology and you're creating any kind of assignment, you have that little target button down here that will allow you to assign individual benchmarks to whatever it is you're doing. And I love that because that's how I get that mastery option, to be able to say this specific set of vocabulary is tied to SS7C32. So when my students master this, that shows me that they have a good understanding of that particular benchmark. By tying those things together, my students, first of all, see exactly what is expected of them. But me, on the instructor side, I'm able to see what my students have accomplished and where they're falling short, where they're struggling. XP and AP. In just a minute, we'll go to the actual resource where you can see my item shop and things. But tracking this within Schoology is made very easy with this total points column in the gradebook. So as you set your gradebook up, and we can look at an example of that in a little bit, but as you set your gradebook up, you have the option to look at the percentage grade, but you also have the option to open up the total points column. So this shows me that in all the assignments I've given, there's a possible 18,441 points available. And it does the math for me to show, well, this student, they've got 4,000 of them. This student's only got 2,000. I know that maybe they need to pick up the pace a little bit, or maybe they've been struggling. This student has 5,000. They're really moving along nicely. And so those points are totaled up for you, and you're not having to sit there every night like what I used to have to do before I knew about the total points column, sit there every night and do the math myself. We can put the link to this presentation later. I'm not going to go through all this research, but I come from a research background, and so I'm always very hesitant to believe in some new fad unless there's research to back it up. This is some of the research on gamification, why it works, how it works. So I invite you guys to investigate that at your leisure. And there's some of the resources that I used whenever I was first getting into gamification. If we go to Schoology, this is what the resource actually looks like within the public resources. So when you're in Schoology and you just go to resources and public, you can type Open Civics into the search box and it will pop this up for you. And this is my original gamified course. Before I move on, is there anything I need to address? David, are we doing good?
We're doing great. There's a few questions that we can answer now, or you can answer them at the end.
Okay. Why don't you give me a couple of them before we start diving into this?
I'll give you the I think the big three.
Okay.
So, do you allow your students to finish your class early if they finish all the quests?
Yes, I do. I feel like that's kind of their reward. I don't feel it would be fair to hold them back just because they're capable of moving more quickly than their classmates. So the deal that I make them is if they finish early, that's fine. I'm not going to create any new assignments for them. But if they finish before our final exam, so in Civics, that was their end of course exam. Now I teach advanced placement courses, so it's our AP exam in May. The deal I make them is if you finish everything before that test comes up, you are now a teacher in this classroom. And it's your job to do what I've been doing all year, sit with people who are struggling and help work them through their roadblocks. So they're more than welcome to finish early, but then they're going to take on that teacher role.
Wish I had you as a teacher. Another big one is, when you built this out, did you build it out all at once before the school year, or did you kind of build the quests out throughout the year?
The first year that I tried this, I had to build it throughout the year because we were just trying it. I was switching gears mid-year. My second year going into this, knowing how well it worked, I built everything out at the beginning of the school year, and it was 100% ready to run from beginning to end before the school year started. I know that's a lot of work up front, but when you think about those high flyers, the worst thing that can happen is have one of those high flyers get to the end of your curriculum, or not the end of your curriculum, I should say the end of what you have already put out there.
Right.
So there's more work to be done after that, but you haven't gotten that loaded for them yet. So then what happens is those kids are spinning their wheels. It's like playing a video game and then getting to a level that was never finished. And that's really frustrating for them. And you see engagement begin to drop off because now they can't finish. And there's that human need to finish things. So it's a lot of work up front, but it saves you time later in the year, and it keeps those kids pushing forward because there's nothing to prevent them from finishing at that point, if that makes sense.
That does. I'm going to ask everyone to keep those questions coming in. Why don't we jump into Schoology? Because I think some of these questions that I'm getting will be answered as people see the course.
Okay.
And then we'll continue at the end. Okay.
So when my students come into this, these two links up here, these are just kind of general things. We were a Cornell Notes school and Avid school at my middle school, so I just provided them with a template. This is a link I provided for the resources because my leaderboard, which you'll see in just a minute, is run through Google Sheets, and so I kind of did a how-to on how to do that. But when we jump into this course information folder, this is kind of the fun stuff, the stuff that my kids can get into that really motivates them to complete this work. So first we have the leaderboard. And this would be where my students track themselves every day. Their original gamer tags were just their school assigned usernames, which is usually the first 3 letters of their last name, first letter of their first name. Very boring, not fun. And so what I would do is over the course of the year, I would invite them to purchase from the item shop a new name. And you can see some of them are very creative. Some of them, they just wanted their name up there. Magic Mangoes here. I don't know what that was happening there, but they get really motivated to get their name up there. And one of the things that I noticed, even with my high schoolers, is when they're lower on the leaderboard, and this one's out of order for some reason, but we can fix that really quickly. Whenever they're lower on the leaderboard, they have a tendency to use some kind of fictional name, some way they can't be identified. But then when they get to the top, and you can see some good examples of this here, they're much more likely to suddenly change it to their name, because there's that sense of pride of, I worked myself all the way up from the bottom to the top. You're going to know who I am. I want you to know that I'm number 2, that I'm number 5. So the leaderboard is a huge motivator. And I've had people ask, well, do you think it's right that they can all see where everybody's at? Do you think it's right that they compete with one another? How do these poor kids way down here at the bottom feel? It works really well, because what winds up happening is these kids at the bottom, they really don't, it's not, their self-esteem doesn't get knocked, because they still get a thrill if they're at 94 one day and then they complete some work and they wind up at 88. That's still really exciting for them, because now they're seeing movement. Or if they swap places with the person in front of them, so they just move from 93 to 92, there's that excitement of, yeah, I just beat him. I'm taking him down one at a time. And I've never had a kid be embarrassed about this. I mean, they have the option to change their name to whatever they want. So if they don't want anybody to know who they are, they just buy a name change and then they don't tell anybody what their name is. This is kind of the centerpiece of a gamified course to me. A well-run leaderboard just locks them right in and gets them so excited about what you're doing. If we go back to course information, the item shop, there's a lot of things housed within this folder. And again, what I love about Schoology is it was so simple just to build these things. You know, these are just pages where I list things. It didn't cost me any money. I didn't have to go out and get anything special, but it changed the entire climate of my classroom and my instruction. The achievement list, these were ways they could earn AP. So this is where their money came from: achieving standards, attendance, perfect attendance, posting in discussions, posting in our Quest forums. Those would be places almost like parking lots in professional development. My kids would have a Quest forum where if there was something difficult, they could post a question. And then kids from other hours even could post in there and say, oh yeah, I had that same problem. Here's what I did. So they could go through that list, maybe find some ways that they could earn some AP. And then their item shop. My item shop for my high schoolers is much different. Just it's the nature of the beast that high schoolers are interested in different things. But the same basic elements are there. Rename me, that's where they buy their new name. Color me, emoji me, supersize me, look at me. All of these are just ways for them to get some attention. So those kids who are always acting out or who are saying weird things in class because they just want some attention, this is a way for them to get that in a constructive way. So all, you know, again, doesn't cost me any money. They give me 200 AP, which they can only get by completing work in my classroom and doing it to a perfect level, really. And I just go and I change the font color on their name on the leaderboard, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. This one was a big deal. Look at me, where you have the option to post updates in Schoology, things that every single student sees across the board. For 500 AP, a student could tell me what they wanted posted as a public update. And as long as it was school appropriate, I would put it out there for everybody to see. So a lot of my girls would post things about their best friend. I want everybody to know that so-and-so is my best friend forever. I had one student who every week for like the last 2 or 3 weeks of school, when I still taught 7th grade, purchased a public update that said, so-and-so is the best student Miss Box has ever had. And that was great for him. He worked his butt off to make sure he still had enough AP to buy that update every single week. And then there were some other options here, but it's something so simple and none of it costs any money, and they just went crazy for it. And then we had our gift shops. I'll just show you one of them. One of the many things that I like about Schoology is students cannot message one another. They can only message the instructor, and then the instructor can message them. So this allowed me to monetize the messaging process. And all I did, these are just emojis. That's it. I just took pictures of emojis. And I told them, if you want to send a message to your friend, or better yet, you want to send a gift to your friend, you message me, the teacher. I will subtract the AP and I'll send a message to your friend with your gift, letting them know that you sent that to them. So every Friday, I would have this huge list of students buying cheese or flowers or whatever for their friends. Cost me no money whatsoever. It, like I said, monetized this messaging feature where students can only message me, and they were motivated to work so that they could send their friend a free piece of cheese, free to me at least, because my policy is always, if it costs money, I'm not going to do it because I'm a teacher and I don't make very much money. Whenever we go to the rest of this, these are just kind of how-to guides, things where if a student is struggling, links to different resources. But again, very easy to load within Schoology. No different from a real video game where you have your help folder, your ways where you can access your tutorials and things. That's what my kids could get here. Internet's moving a little slow or a little stormy down here in Florida today, so bear with me. The journey begins. We're not going to go folder by folder, but this is just kind of the basic introduction to a gamified course. I required my students to do 2 things. First of all, they would go into this folder, which provided them with the video that's kind of their storyline for this game. What is the purpose of playing this game? What are you trying to accomplish? I basically just wrote a storyline that talks about how it's a dystopian future where the United States has fallen apart, and it happened so long ago that nobody can even remember the United States. And now you've discovered these documents and you see that people used to live under democracy and they had choice and they had freedom. And so their job is to go through all of their quests and retrieve all the documentation to put the United States back together. To have a gamified course, you don't have to have a storyline, but it really helps because it attaches a meaning. So many times we have our kids ask us, why am I doing this? Why am I learning this? It doesn't matter. By putting it in that game's storyline, now it does matter. Even if you know, out in the real world, they don't see the applications. They understand that to complete this game, I need to know this stuff. And then I created a game tutorial, which basically just taught them how to use Schoology if they've never used Schoology before. So I walked them through some practice assignments, some practice tests, just so they would get familiar with the functionality of Schoology. Again, that's ease of access when we go back to game design. And that way, whenever they start hitting these quests, they're up and running and they know exactly what to do. Again, you are free to go through any of this. That link is back in the webinar, which I will post in just a minute. I'll put that back up there. But this is free for anybody. You can go into the resources, you can add this to your own resources, and then you have it to go through as much as you want. So that leaves us with about 15 minutes. I know that was kind of a quick overview, but I wanted to give everybody kind of a good foundation of what gamification is and what it looks like within Schoology before we started doing some Q&A.
Thank you for doing that. I mean, I personally learned a lot about gamification in the classroom, and I'm sure everyone else did. And I know they did based off some of the questions and some people commenting awesome and looks great in the box. I don't know if you can see that. I've grouped some of the questions, so I'm going to just read them off to you. So one of them was, how much time does it take students to learn the ins and outs of Schoology as well as the ins and outs of the gamification within the course?
That part really doesn't take very long. Usually, my first week of school, that's procedures and routines. Second week of school, we start running with this. And I find that most students have finished their tutorial by the end of that first week. And I'm willing to sacrifice that 1 week of instruction if it means we're not going to have headaches later on. So I'm not going to have to answer questions of how do I submit a test or how do I upload an assignment to be able to submit it. If that 1 week of practice takes care of that and we can just run for the rest of the year, it's worth the time.
That's great. So what happens to a student at the end of the semester if they're not passing, right? Do they get re-enrolled and start the game over? Do they get re-enrolled and get to start where they were? Do they move on to a different teacher? How does that play into what you created?
Do you mean like they just don't pass the course at the end of the year?
Yep.
Okay, so here's one of the more controversial issues that we usually come upon when we talk about gamification. Because my policy is 100% mastery or nothing, I tell my students there's really only 2 grades you can get in this class on any assignment. You're either going to make 100% or you're going to have a 0 because you're not done yet. A 0 is never firm in my class. And the only way I give a student a 0 is if I feel like they're not making adequate progress. So they're not making any effort, basically. And I have students do that every once in a while where they think that I'll eventually give up and I'll let them fail and stop pressing them to complete the work. That takes a little bit of time to iron out in the beginning of the year. But what they find after a while is as long as they're growing, I'm going to work with them. And that 0, that is not going to stand. We're going to keep working on it. You're going to turn it in again, get a 50%, turn it again, get an 85%. And we're going to keep going until you get where you need to be. So what winds up happening is really nobody fails because I've created an environment where the only way you can fail is if you just don't try at all. And we have that, you know, you'll always have 1 or 2 students that no matter what you try, it just doesn't work for them. And so I'll always have a couple students who they just dig their heels in, they refuse to do the work. That becomes a management issue on my part where you talk to parents, where you usually it will involve a special education coordinator or something. Somebody is going to be involved in this, or we can try and team up and create a plan that works for this kid. But for 98% of my kids, they can't fail because they're working and they're growing. So as long as they keep reattempting, as long as they keep trying, they get there eventually. And what you see is the speed of their accuracy increases over the course of the year. So where at the beginning of the year, it may take them 4 or 5 tries on an assignment before they reach mastery, by the end of the year, it may take 2 times, if that, because they start to learn how to self-assess. A lot of our kids don't know how to do that. They don't know how to use a rubric. They read it and they just think it's nonsense. But by the end of the year, my kids start learning, oh, if I turn this in the way it is, she's going to tell me I need to work on this, this, and this. So I might as well just get that done before I turn it in. And I see the pace increase for them. Not all of my students finish the curriculum. Some of them don't make it to the end. I'm okay with that because what they make it through, they've actually learned. I would much rather have them get through this curriculum that they've really internalized, that they can really hold on to, than have them get through everything and remember nothing.
That makes sense. And this leads into, we've had a bunch of questions about how you break up the day. So is it mostly do you have your students mostly working on individual things or in groups? Is it more traditional instruction in the classroom and assignments at home, or more project-based stuff and more videos and reading at home? Like, what was the breakdown for the game from a student perspective of classroom and home, and your involvement and their involvement and that kind of stuff?
It depends on the kid. The same way with a game, some kids prefer to play alone, some prefer to play in a group, some prefer to play in short spurts. My classroom is set up the same way. Some students never want to talk to me. They just want to plug through it on their own, and as long as they're being successful, I'm going to leave them alone if that's what helps them succeed. And I always have one or two that they're perfectly content just to plug through on their own individually. Every once in a while, I'll be like, hey, you okay over there? And they're fine. Some students want to work in a group with their friends or with other people who are working on the same thing. And so they have that collaborative circle where they're talking about things, they're helping one another. That's fine. Other students either need the intensive help from me, so they've really hit a roadblock and I need to sit and work with them one-on-one, or I'll have a group of students who are all on a similar topic and they're kind of asking similar questions. So instead of answering that same question over and over again individually, what I'll do is I'll group them up and I'll have kind of like a mini classroom over in the corner where we talk about that specific topic together. And that's one of the things I love about this is I'm free now to do that. When you do a lot of direct instruction at the front of the room where everybody just has to sit and listen to you, there's that old phrase, teaching to the middle. And that's what you have to do. You can't target any individual kid or any individual need. When I started flipping the way I did things and pushing out this gamified course, I was then free as a teacher to be roaming around and interacting with my students at the level they needed me to be.
Interesting. And so we've had a bunch of questions coming about how much time did you spend setting up the leaderboard? How much time did you spend keeping it up to date? Is that where you also tracked like how much students spent on items and XP and purchase things? Was that all on that same leaderboard, and how much time did that take? It seems like from the questions, it seems like everyone thinks that took a lot of time, and that was where you spent most of your personal time keeping things up to date.
The first year I did this, it required an enormous amount of time because I didn't really know what I was doing yet. And, you're building the plane as you're flying it. Now that I have the framework established, it really doesn't take any time at all. I showed that total points column, which I should have shown in the grade book. But that total points column helps me a lot, because what I do is I just adjust the value of each assignment. Instead of making it a 100-point assignment, I make it a 5,000-point assignment. And that helps with some of the leaderboard work, because then I can just let Schoology do the work for me, and then I just put the numbers in at the end of the day. When it comes to AP, what I told students, because that first year I was very responsive. If you wanted something from me, I was going to get it to you immediately. That drove me crazy. So what I do now is Friday is the day that purchases are processed. So you can message me to purchase something anytime during the week, but that's not going to get processed until Friday. And so it's not as complicated as it sounds. You just kind of usually, I would have 20 to 30 kids purchase something over the course of a week. It was very quick to go through and process all of that. If it's leaderboard stuff, I do all that in the same place. If it's gift stuff, it's really easy just to pop that emoji in there and send it to a kid. But then I would just keep that, keep a piece of paper and just write down, make sure you subtract 20 from Johnny, 30 from Susie, and then I would just go back into my leaderboard and subtract that, and it would be done.
Yeah, you basically created your own little cash register as if you were in the game. That sounds great. So you mentioned the grade book, which I know you weren't able to show, and that's fine. How did the leaderboard map to? Did it map to a traditional grade, or did it not?
Basically what happens is to transfer it into a traditional grade where every assignment they receive their XP on, that's 100%. Because I tell them, you're not going to get that XP. You are not going to be allowed to move on until you get 100%. And so I explain, you got to talk to your administrator about this stuff before you do it. You can't just start throwing out these grades.
Right.
And have your principal not know what's going on. But I explained to him the purpose behind what I was doing. He agreed that that would probably work pretty well, and he was okay with that. So really what my grade book looks like is everything that's been done is 100%. Anything that I feel like they're dragging their feet on becomes a 0. And that can kind of change the grade some, but my kids very quickly figure out if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and they're making that progress and they're talking to me when they feel like they can't make that progress. They're not just checking out. They're going to wind up with an A in the class because that's your only option. If you're passing levels, if you're making that conscious effort to really understand this material, you're going to get your A. Which that's, that's controversial. A lot of people are not comfortable with that, and they feel like it's giving away grades. But what it's allowed me to do as the teacher is take my standards and raise them to a point of, some people would say craziness. What I expect for mastery is pretty extreme. I'm not giving away grades by any means, because to get that 100%, I don't care if you're a student with an IEP or if you're a student with a 4.0, you are going to be held to the same standard. You get as much time as you need to get there, but you will do that work. And they do it, and they get there in their own time. And so I don't feel bad giving them that grade because they earned it.
So it seems like you said a magic acronym there, which is IEP, because we just got a bunch of questions in a row all around. Have you tried this with special ed students who need extra time and special attention? It sounds like you did.
Oh, yes. The majority of students that I had when I taught 7th grade were either bottom quartile or special education students, which unfortunately tend to fall in that bottom quartile a lot. Yep. This worked beautifully with them. I actually had an inclusion teacher come to me and say one of my students came to her in tears, and she was like, "Oh no, what's wrong? What happened?" And it turns out they were good tears, because she told her, for the first time in my life, I understand what it feels like to do well in a class. And what was happening is, for the first time, that kid was given the time to understand something. Most classrooms didn't move at her pace, and so she had just written herself off as stupid. Obviously, I'm never going to get this. I'm never going to be successful. And all it was is she just needed the time to get there. And even in my AP course that I teach now, I get a lot of special education students, and it's because, I think the guidance counselors know if these kids want that AP credit, if they want to try something more complicated, this is going to work for them. And so you clearly built this course twice now. You've used it multiple times. How do you feel this would work in another subject like math or science or art or, other subjects? Do you think this could work in anything? I know it can, because there are other teachers out there doing it. Chris Aviles, he's one of the kind of foundational people on gamification. He taught language arts English. Glenn Irvin, one of the Schoology ambassadors, he has done a tremendous amount of work with gamification in his Spanish classes. Math, I've seen teachers do it in math. Math obviously works a little bit differently, because you kind of have to go in order. You do have to follow a set of steps, but I've seen it happen and it works. I don't know that there's any subject under the sun where you cannot gamify the course and get your kids more engaged.
That is great. Well, we've gotten a lot more questions in, and I just want to let everyone know that we're going to send an email with personalized answers to everyone, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So Beth, thank you so much for doing this. Everyone, will send out the slides with the course information, which we'll put on public resources somewhere where you guys can all find them. as well as this recording, and like I said, the Q&A. And oh, look, and Beth was nice enough to put her email and Twitter. So it sounds like if you guys have questions that we can't answer right now in the Q&A, you can reach out. Beth, is that right?
That would be perfectly fine. It's summertime. I have time to answer questions.
I mean, I think we all know, as now that I'm at Schoology, I've learned that as much as you guys say you have time over the summer, you're always working.
This is true, but this is my passion project, so I make time. I will make time to answer any questions that are sent to me because I love sharing this with people.
Well, thank you so much. This was great. And thank you for everyone who attended. And everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.